thank you everyone for joining. As noted, the topic today is your lawn and organic land care practices and how important they are to our environment and to all who live and dwell in it. Before I turn it over to Dina, two editorials. One is the Wilton High School and the Northeast Organic Farming Association of Connecticut are jointly running a native plant sale, and some of the proceeds will go to the Wilton High School's organic garden. So this is a way for people to obtain, often very difficult to find, indigenous plants that certainly do very well in our environment and are very important to pollinators and to other animals. You can find information on how to purchase these at the NOFA website, which is ctnofa.org. And if you contact Planet New Canaan at Planet New Canaan, that's one word, at gmail.com, they might be able to arrange delivery directly to your home. So this is a great opportunity. I encourage you to take advantage of it. Second editorial is that Planet New Canaan, along with Copia Landscaping and Nursery, which is just over the border in Lewisboro, are running a native plant sale. And so with a certain minimum purchase, part of that money will be donated to Bristow Bird Sanctuary in New Canaan, which is in the process of being rehabilitated with the exotic invasive species pulled out and the native species put in. So this is a way to help that process along. And so would encourage you to patronize them, and please mention Planet New Canaan when you do so. So I'll now turn it over to Dina Brewster. Dina has been a friend and also a artisanal food supplier to me for well over 10 years. She is the founder and farmer at the Hickories, which is an organic farm in Ridgefield. They're at thehickories.org. Terrific food, which I've been purchasing gleefully for a long time. In fact, dinner tonight was one of her hams. So I can vouch for her product. In addition, she's very active in the pollinator movement and organic farming generally, and land preservation. And she is also the executive director of the Northeast Organic Farming Association of Connecticut. And so she'll be speaking on organic land care practices. So Dina, over to you.
Terrific, thank you. Thank you, John. Thank you to the New Canaan Library. I'm so glad to be able to join you all tonight. Unusual format. I was hoping to be obviously with you in person, but this is my first time doing a large presentation via Zoom, so we'll see how I do with my chat windows and Q&As, and I will try to find plenty of time in the hour that we have to answer questions. Let me start just by sharing out a screen I have. I'm going to spend, hopefully that is working. Can everybody see? Yeah? Yeah. Great. So I'm going to talk a bit about and my journey towards our conversation around land care and lawn care. And I think, you know, it's interesting as a farmer to speak to you because obviously I'm not speaking to the future farmers of America out there tonight, but I think many of us found ourselves in circumstances where we want to feel like we can contribute to anything, any parcel of land we have control of. And so many of the lessons that I have learned on my farm, I hope to be able to translate tonight to you, to the land that you manage, your backyards, your front yards even. So with that, I'll give just a quick introduction to expound upon my own journey to this. First, Connecticut NOFA, as some of you may know, our job is really, we started as a farming organization. It is to ensure the growth and viability of organic agriculture, food, and land care in our state. It's been an organization that's been around for 38 years. I am amazed to recollect that it was 25 years ago that I first attended a NOFA training. And it was with this man, Bill Dusing, who really did, he was the founder of Connecticut NOFA, and joined Connecticut to the 7 states that are the Northeast Organic Farming Association. Bill was a visionary, an incredibly hard worker, and a very good farmer. And so it's exciting to be able to carry on his work to our state. And I was a poetry teacher in the Bronx before I became a farmer. So this has been quite a journey for me. And it was really through meeting Bill and attending NOFA training, started trying to understand how I could contribute to the climate crisis. And so through NOFA, I attended winter conferences. We now have had them for 39 years. I attended courses on getting started in farming, beginning women's farmers programs. So many different farmers across our state have used NOFA as a training platform to engage with the food movement. And over the last 16 years, this is just some nice photos to get you out of your living room for a little bit. I have built a farm here in Ridgefield that is largely fruit and vegetables, but we do have livestock as well. So we have, I raise pork and lamb or sheep, and we do a lot of community engagement. But primarily I've been focused on raising fruits and vegetables as a way of expressing my contribution to food access issues, to soil and land care issues, and in specific, really trying to build a local economy around food, just to combat the industrialization of our food supply, which is certainly something that is on my mind. In the backdrop of all of these beautiful pictures of my farm, it has become clear to me in my role with NOFA in the last couple of years that despite all that has been happening in the local food movement, the climate crisis really has loomed very large. And this new, as I said, I was an English teacher, so I like big words. So I always like starting with this big word, the Anthropocene. Despite the joy of my farm, I was always aware that the climate situation is one that is going to take more than just my farm alone. And so part of what I bring to NOFA is, and I use this little image here as a analogy, is an understanding of the intricacy of the natural world around us. And I have 2 young children, and so I find myself playing this Jenga game. I'm sure many of you know this children's game, but it has become an interesting model for me, and I invite you to think about it with me tonight, of the development ecologically and over geologically of the natural world, that through millions and millions of years of evolution, nature has set up a series of incredibly complex, balanced, interdependent relationships. And often, I think, in the last Anthropocene, as they call it, we have found ourselves sometimes carelessly playing Jenga with that complex structure. We have pulled through fossil fuel extraction one structural piece of that puzzle away. We have pulled through the insect die-off. We have pulled another central piece away. Polluting our air, polluting our water. Each of those gestures has added a certain level of instability in what was once a very stable system. And so with that in the background of my mind, I have begun to expand the way that NOFA addresses the climate crisis. And that is to say, each of us has a role to play when we think about the amount of land, I think 85% of the land east of the Mississippi is privately held. So we cannot expect the handful of small organic farmers or the handful of public parks to do the work of restoring the ecological balance when 85% of our land is privately held in backyards, front yards, municipal soccer fields, etc. And so if we want to do something about the climate crisis, and if we want to do something about our sense of community, we need to figure out how to create resilience in all working land. That is everything from soccer fields to rain gardens, rooftop gardens, backyards, and figure out a way in which our life, and this is really where I want to begin our talk tonight, how can our lives as homeowners begin to slide those pieces back in to that Jenga tower? How can we take some piece of the world that we control, whether it is the healthy soil in our backyards or the plants that we are growing, how can we take some of those pieces and link arms with farmers, link arms with the land trusts around us in restoring stability to the natural world? So NOFA has within it a program called OLC, the Organic Land Care Program. And we have our own website, organiclandcare.net. And that program is the next generation of land stewards who are not necessarily farmers. So we have an ag arm, an agricultural arm that trains farmers. And then we have another arm that trains landscapers and homeowners in organic land stewardship and organic land practices. And what I seek to talk to you about tonight is that we actually, if we are going to make a difference in the future of the planet, we need to all get into the same boat and all row in the same direction. And so therefore, the stakeholders at the Northeast Organic Farming Association have now broadened. And so we find ourselves working not just with farmers, but also with land trusts, with municipal land managers, with landscape architects, with kids, with gardeners, with scientists. The list goes on and on. But it does need to be a sort of community effort. And so how does your lawn play into this? How does your backyard play into this puzzle? And even your community garden plot or the land over which you have influence. How can you fit your own life into this schema, and how can your gestures on that land, again, add to the stability of the system rather than detract from it? So that's a pretty big ask, and it's a pretty big mission for this small group of farmers and landscapers to take on at NOFA, a small nonprofit in our state and across the Northeast. But I am reminded often, as I have struggled with the enormity of the tasks in front of us, I am reminded often of what Bill Dewing, our founder, said to me when I approached him as a poetry teacher coming out of the Bronx and said I wanted to become a farmer when I was 25 or however old I was. And I think he looked at me and he knew I was going to need a fair amount of help and knew that I was pretty green. And so he said, Dina, you know, whenever you get frustrated or whenever you're feeling like you're overwhelmed, put down, you know, get off your tractor, put down your shovel and take a walk in the woods. Because, and I certainly, that the wisdom of that rings only more so true today. But what he was suggesting is that everything that we see functioning in the natural world in a healthy New England forest can be mimicked in our home landscape or on our farms. And so the amount of, the amount of life supported in a healthy New England forest, the deer, the turkeys, the insects, the soil microbiology, all of that is supported with one amendment a year. And that is 3 or 4 inches of deciduous leaves that fall on the forest floor. You don't see people dumping bags of fertilizer and liming, and none of that has to happen in a New England forest. It is an ecology that is a closed loop system that has built structural integrity in and to itself. And so I have often turned to Bill's advice over the years, and I ask you to do that tonight, to take a walk in the woods, even in your own mind, and mimic those systems in your home landscape. How well do the pieces work together? How much biology, how much life can your home landscape protect and support? And so in embarking on this path with homeowners, a couple of years ago, I ran smack dab into the Pollinator Pathway. I believe New Canaan has a Pollinator Pathway chapter already set up and hopefully thriving. And so you then know these wonderful folks and their work. And they're, having been in the environmental movement now for nearly 20 years, I've never seen anything like the success of this group. And it has caught on like absolute wildfire. I think they're now over 85 towns across Connecticut and New York, probably more than that actually in the last little while. And their message is so simple and so clear. They are speaking to homeowners primarily. And so this is a slide taken from one of the Pollinator Pathway presentations. And I'm going to focus in just on a couple of pieces of it this evening. But the Pollinator Pathway is asking you to do 3 things. First, to rethink your lawn. Second, to plant native plants. And third, to avoid pesticides. The rethinking of your lawn is simply about whether or not our cultural gesture, whether or not we need to put on our bug eyes and look at our landscape and understand whether or not that crop is the most useful thing we could do with our land. And I'll talk more about that in a minute, the grass crop or the sod crop. Plant native plants is really what I'm going to focus on in depth. And then lastly, the no pesticide issue is really about returning to that understanding of the Jenga tower. Putting pesticides into your home landscape, is that removing structural integrity or inserting structural integrity? And how can we make our lives about inserting integrity into that tower of nature around us? And pesticides certainly are one of those things that can negatively impact the strength of the natural world around us. And with that message, the Pollinator Pathway has found a tremendous amount of success. They are building essentially wildlife corridors or pathways for insects, in specific pollinators, but all to repopulate our state. And the reason this is important takes me back to the beginning of what I said, which is I'm a farmer, and these bugs are bringing you your supper. And without them, I have no livelihood, and there is no food in our community. I am struck always by the subheading. There's a fellow, Doug Ptolemy, who has also been an inspiration to many of us in this movement, who describes insects as the little things upon which we all depend. They are, in fact, in terrifying numbers being threatened. One of the most recent studies suggests a 74% decline in insect abundance in my lifetime, in the last 40 years. And I invite you to think about the scale of that decline and the extent to which that threatens not only our food supply, but also all of the other aspects in that tower, all the other aspects of nature that depend on insects all the way up the food chain. So this is what we are going to be talking a little bit about tonight, is the extent to which your backyard, your lawn, your home landscape can become connected again. We exist now in this first picture largely in Fairfield County as a fragmented landscape. We have pieces of wilderness that still exist thanks to the land trusts, and our homes are largely disconnected from those wildernesses, and our homes are largely in sod, in a sod crop or in lawn that doesn't support for a bug or a mammal or any kind of biology, even a soil bacteria moving through this landscape. The fragmentation makes that movement impossible. And so what the pollinator pathway suggests is that we connect up this landscape again, that we become stepping stones, essentially, for the free flow of species across the landscape. If you have habitat in your backyard that can support life again, then your backyard becomes a public park through the eyes of an insect or a mammal or any other piece of our biology. Now, of course, how do we do that? So in getting to the details of this, there is one major principle we our time tonight, and that has to do with this funny looking slide about the root depth and size and scope of a diversity of plants. This particular image is taken from the prairie, but if you look all the way here on the left, I believe, which is the left of your screen, you see the root depth of a sod crop. That is mostly your lawn. I think you guys can see that. It shows an incredibly shallow root depth, one that largely functions in the landscape as sort of green concrete. Water washes off it and rarely can penetrate. These plants, as you study this, have a diversity of appeal above ground, but also incredibly exciting life below ground. They are plumbing the soil at different depths and therefore extracting different parts of the biology, the minerals, and having different interactions with the fungi in the soil. They are also getting to water. And so these plants are drought resistant in a way because of the depth and the integrity of their root system. They are drought resistant in a way that a sod crop is not, or a lawn is not. And so we ask that as we develop diversity as the sort of new metric of success in a home landscape, that we get that diversity both of animals and insects. We invite that diversity in with a diversity of plants. So Pollinator Pathway and NOFA set to work on trying to understand how we can bring to your and all of the strength of a New England forest into your home landscape. And we do that first by bringing in the plants. If you put in the plants, everything else will follow. And maybe I should even back up a step and say you start by building healthy soil, which is eliminating the toxics from your home environment. No more pesticides, as they say, no more heavy synthetic fertilizers. That will regenerate soil life. The diversity in the soil will support a diversity of plants next. And that diversity of plants will bring in a diversity of insects. If you go, this is a handout that comes from the Connecticut Ag Experiment Station, but is then also exists on the Pollinator Pathway website. This shows you for spring, summer, and fall, a set of blooms with support from now until frost. The reason that diversity is important has to do with the fact that these bugs have many generations and a long lifespan. So therefore, you know, there's this sort of adage that you can't just sort of bring someone to dinner and expect to feed them, have a house guest for a week and expect to feed them on Monday and never again, right? These bugs need something to eat while the queens are emerging this time of year. So you can look out your window and figure out how many things are in bloom right now as you look out your window in your home landscape. Because what we know is that the queen bees have now emerged. The queen bumblebees are native bees that hold up the whole food system. They have now emerged. They are flying over the Connecticut landscape, trying to find a place to nest. You'll see them actually, they're quite beautiful, these little bumblebees. They are the queens and they are flying about 6 inches. You'll see them hovering over the soil in the forests and probably in your yard, flying about 6 inches over the ground looking for nesting sites. And they will find nests in the next week or so, and then they will go out to find pollen and nectar. So what in your yard is blooming right now? There is early zizias, there are willows, there are shad, there are all kinds of things that can be incorporated into your home landscape to provide spring habitat, which is one of the most critical for these pollinators. And begin early on in the year to set your yard up as a beacon for these insects, that they can find a home, that you are home to them as well. So as you follow this little chart, and as I got to know the folks at the experiment station, you follow this chart and you want to grab a couple of plants from the top, a couple of plants from the middle, summer blooms, and a couple of plants from the bottom, the fall blooms, so that insects have something to eat over the course of the entire season, and therefore the birds raising their babies have something to feed out over the course of the entire year. So I encourage you to look at that site, and as I got to become passionate about this work, I spent a certain amount of time at the Ag Experiment Station. They have quite a stake in trying to protect the insects of Connecticut, because they know the insects are supporting all of the farms. And so they, in trying to save pollinators, have spent a lot of time thinking about how to plant native plants to support those pollinators. And it became clear to me in doing this work that there was a fundamental problem in our system, which is we all know we should plant the right plant. We all know that we should be planting natives, but then as we run out to find them, we can often go to a Pollinator Pathway lecture, be inspired, know we need to buy native plants, and run to Home Depot to buy the newest pollinator series fresh in from Tennessee or Iowa or someplace very, very far away. So what in essence we discovered is that when we bring native plants, even if they are native by name, to Connecticut, that are genetics that have come from further away, other places in the country, those plants have a hard time persisting, and they can confuse insects, because a Tennessee milkweed is a fundamentally, on some insectary level, a Tennessee milkweed is a fundamentally different thing than our true Connecticut natives. And so as we try to bring diversity into the home landscape, I'm going to make it a lot harder for you, which is you don't just need native plants, but the creme de la creme is the native plants that are from Connecticut ecotypes or our soil. So our soil and our ecology. So this page in front of you shows some of the plants that we have been working on. And I, in talking to Dr. Stoner and some of the really brilliant folks at the Connecticut Ag Experiment Station, they said, well, you know, we know all these species are critical, but we need local ecotypes and we don't have any access to that. And I thought, well, I'm a farmer. I may not know much about, you know, the Latin names of all of these plants as they do, but I do know how to grow. I knew how to grow stuff and I know how to grow plants. And so I said, well, I can certainly help with that aspect of it. And so with that, we at Connecticut NOFA have teamed up with homeowners and scientists. We've gone back to that stakeholder page and brought everybody together under a new project called the Ecotype Project. And that is born out of this new map that I wanted to share with you tonight. You can find where we are in New Canaan and Ridgefield on here. And this is a map of your ecoregion, meaning the plants, insects, animals, all of those things that are defined without state borders, without knowing anything. These are soil types, hydrology, all of those things come together and present a map of essentially different genetics from one species to another across our region. So what we can say is that a milkweed collected in ecoregion 59, for example, is more likely to persist in ecoregion 59 than anywhere else. It is more likely to thrive here than anywhere else. And the milkweed that may be raised all the way over here in ecoregion 61 simply doesn't have as good of a chance in a restoration project of making it in a Connecticut ecology. So what does that mean that you can do? What can you do about that? First, now that we have an understanding in the science community of what ecotypes mean and their value, we have to go back to the drawing board and start creating them for you. We need you to plant in your backyard this year Connecticut ecotypes of native plants, because they will provide the best habitat for all of that diversity. They will be the strongest gesture that we can make to slide one of those Jenga pieces, so to speak, back into the puzzle. So how are we going to do it? These plants really haven't existed. And so the first thing that we've been doing as Connecticut NOFA over the last year is to work with botanists from Highstead Arboretum. There are other young botanists in Durham, Connecticut, and all over the state to wild collect the true Connecticut, the real Yankees of the native plants that exist in this region. And they have gone out into the land trusts, into the backwaters of who knows where in Connecticut, these brilliant botanists, and found collections, found the true ecotypes, these genetic samples of important plants that are most critical to habitat restoration in your backyard. And we as farmers have taken that seed and started to grow different kinds of backyards on our farm. So this is a picture of my yard here at the Hickories, and this is New York ironweed and Joe Pyeweed, two beautiful native plants in bloom. And you can still see there are places to run. I have young kids, so there are places to run through this field that are mowed grass, but is and in row crops of these beautiful native plants. And we as farmers are using these plots to amplify seed production. We are growing seed for you in these plots. So the botanists found the seed. They brought that seed to the farms. The farmers have grown out the plants. And the next piece in that lineup are the seed savers. And there's a brilliant group of young seed savers who have come in on a mission to make sure that every one of those special Connecticut plants that was first planted on my farm, did 200 as one example. We planted 200 ironweed plants, the beautiful purple ones on the right there, this year. And from that, we collected over 400,000 seeds. So 200 seeds turns into 400,000. It's a pretty solid ROI. And we have been able to then take those seeds, and the next step in the line is to give them to nursery growers. So some of you guys probably know Sal Gilberti at Gilberti's Herb and Garden Center, Daryl Newman at Planter's Choice up in Newtown, have worked with Connecticut NOFA to take this special seed, the first certified organic ecotype seed, and grow out plants that you and your landscapers and you personally can now come and buy for your home landscape. So these plants can go in anything from a small container on your patio, because maybe you've decided that this year the first step is just to eliminate the pesticides from your lawn, and you're going to put flowers on your patio to bring the bugs in. I can guarantee you these bugs will find you. So if you put in a little pot, you put these plants in, they bloom, and within moments, within minutes, the bugs will find them. And I can thank you for that, because those same bugs will come out and also pollinate my squash plants and my tomato plants and everything else. But they will find refuge, or they will find habitat in your home landscape. We can then, if you're feeling very brave, you can start actual pollinator gardens, and many folks for whom their vast expanse of lawn may have been useful while their kids were little. It's not as needed anymore, and so you might be able to take a section of your yard and just pollinator garden it. Put big blocks of these plants in and let the bugs and the soil start to work on behalf of our overall ecology. There are also land trusts, so a huge thank you and a huge credit goes to the Aspetuck Land Trust in our region for working on the Green Corridor, working on building these habitat restoration sites, not just on land trust property, but also and then we can look to nature centers and the Audubon and a number of other groups who are working in New Canaan to really scale up this effort and make a big difference. Just as a quick aside before we open it up for questions here, with 10 minutes or 15 minutes to go, the stakeholders, what we are finding is so exciting about this effort to transform backyards into diverse pollinator habitats is so many people have come to the table. We have farmers, we have nursery growers. Pictured here is Jim Hunter, a teacher at Wilton High School, and Brett, one of his students, who have championed a plant sale. So they have taken some of these seeds, and high school students, I think there may be another effort happening among us, several different high schools in our state now. High school students are starting to grow out these plants because young people, you know, I can't say it enough, but young people are like the most wonderful source of renewable energy that we have in Connecticut. And so these young activists have really kind of put their hands in the dirt and started producing these plants with us because they believe that their future may in fact be secured if these plants get into your home landscape. And so the Wilton plant sale is coming up. I believe that I think I have a slide here at the end. Here it is. And those young students have worked with farmers and worked with nursery growers and worked with their teachers to try to convince you to come out and buy these plants. And John mentioned it at the beginning. I encourage you to go to the Wilton High School Garden Club website and look at the different plants that they have for sale. Some of that seed was grown out in this landscape you can see on my farm. Some of that seed is from my farm. But it is in conjunction with this myriad group that we have been able to actually provide the plant stock or the essential pieces that you would need to transform this landscape. Many of us, I think myself included, in approaching these plants for the first time, they are not plants that we are typically used to working with. So they are not your begonias and impatiens and the typical nursery garden annual bedding plants that we're used to seeing. And for me as a farmer, I can commiserate with many of you for whom this is sort of a new set of players to work with, or a new group of plants, because I had never grown anything like this. I've been growing tomatoes and lettuce and peppers and everything else John can tell you about for the last 15 years. And when I was approached by these conservation folks and they said, we want you to grow Eupatorium purpureum or whatever it was, I got nervous too. The solace I can offer you is that these plants are essentially weeds. They are called New York ironweed, Joe Pye weed, and they have grown on my farm as happily and and under a significant amount of neglect. They have grown very, very well. They are easy to grow, and they can inhabit both small spaces. If you can tuck a few in a corner, buy 5 or 6. If you're feeling bold and you want to really transform your landscape and see what happens, they plant, get 60 or 80 and put them all in. They will take. They were meant to be here. They evolved to be here. And so they are the lowest hanging fruit in terms of transforming your backyard. They are scrappy little plants. They don't take a lot of fertility. And so they are kind of the best place to start. The plant sale is happening. Obviously, NOFA is thrilled to be a part of that initiative with so many other folks. But I do think that as I want to end a couple minutes early to answer questions, I do think that there are larger pieces at play in the backyard. And so I'm happy to talk a little bit about those in the remaining time that we have. I don't know, Michaela, if you want to take over questions.
Yep, so we did have one question come in so far, right. Actually 2 now. So first question for you, Dina, is it helpful for small areas to be planted as pollinator pathways? We have an area in our backyard that is about 10 by 30 feet.
That is huge compared to what most people are planting. 10 by 30, I mean, you'd have thousands and thousands and thousands of bugs there. So absolutely. As I showed in that picture, even if you can just grab a old, half broken patio pot and stick a few of them in there, that's a really great place to start. But 10 by 30, I mean, if you could do that, you're doing it big time at that point. So that would be exciting. I do think that it is worth thinking through how you prepare that soil. If it is in a sod crop right now, or if it's in a lawn right now, then you're going to need a little bit of time to transform that area into something into which you can plant all of these native plants or these pollinator friendly plants. Some of that can be done either with equipment, if you have access to large scale equipment to flip the soil, or you can simply smother it by putting down a tarp or cardboard or anything else. Mow it really short this time of year, smother it, and let that sod sort of rot back into the soil, and then plant in and amongst that. There will be folks at the nurseries. I know Planter's Choice is working on this, and I can definitely recommend the people at Gilberti's. If you said, well, these are the colors I want, and these are the sizes I want, and this is how much of my backyard, count on your retail nursery to show you a design for how you might want to place the plants in that environment as well. I do think it is important to be mindful of the soil type in terms of whether or not that 10 by 30 area is wet or dry, whether it's sunny or shady. I have not found a tremendous amount of deer pressure on these plants. Their deer are much more eager to eat up all my lettuce and beans than they are to eat these native plants. So I think that's less of a worry for folks as well. Other questions? Help me with this, Kayla. Yeah.
Sure. So the next one that came in, if your property is part wetland, is there any plant that you would suggest? What is your opinion of ferns? They seem to take over. Is that good or bad?
That is good. And the other piece I can say, if it is wetland, true wetland, classified soil type as wetland, then do not mess around with it. There is a federal Wetlands Protection Act that says don't go tilling, rototilling, tearing up any of the precious, precious wetland. If you are fortunate enough to have wetland on your property, then it behooves you to really focus on any of the plants that can grow there. Ferns are very, very important species. Willow are very important species. And there is an entire lineup of native plants that are really built for wetland ecologies. Lobelia is beautiful. And sometimes you can tuck those in and let them flourish. I know here at the farm, we have a lot of Marsh Marigold, which is incredibly beautiful and is blooming this time of year and full of bees.
Awesome.
So I think, yeah, the wetland piece is, and ferns, I think you really do have to, I have learned anyway in working with these new plants that part of the joy is not just how beautiful they are when they are flowering, but the ways in which they can bring a landscape to life. So having willow blooming or having lobelia in your wetland, having these native plants in your backyard. The plants themselves are not the sort of cultivar supermodels that we're used to seeing in the nurseries, but what they bring in really is. And so to be able to sit in your backyard and have it be a thoroughfare of insects and have it be suddenly alive with birds and moving around in bustling life is part of what is so beautiful about these plants, in addition to the fact that they have pretty flowers.
So for those of us who want a lawn that looks like a lawn, how can we keep it looking nice without the chemicals?
Fine. I know.
This might be on people's mind.
Exactly. I have young kids, and we do a lot of events here at the farm. And so we actually do maintain vast expanses of lawn, despite the last presentation. We do have a certain amount of lawn that we keep. And I also am a shepherd. And so I keep a tremendous amount of pasture that is clipped and eaten by animals. And so I know how hard it can be to maintain a lawn without chemicals. One of the things that the easiest piece is that those same principles that we describe, building your soil health through the addition of compost, leaving the clippings. Every time you put down a synthetic pesticide or fertilizer, 50% of the soil biology we eliminated with each application.
Wow.
Yourself chemicals and knowing some self is the first step, and then diversity is the value. So if your lawn right now is nothing but fescue, it will have a very hard time making it through an organic system. You will need diversity of grasses. So adding in everything from buffalo grass to some Dutch white clover, all of those diverse lawn species that can be clipped and maintained low are going to do some of the same stuff. Clover is a wonderful legume And many people say, oh, well, you know, it looks funny or whatever, but it is certainly a huge part of how we are going to maintain tightly clipped lawns. And it's not just any clover. I think the Dutch white clover is probably some of the best because it is low growing.
Got it. So next question, how can I find a landscaper who's not going to greenwash me? I want someone to take care of my lawn and planting beds organically, but I'm not sure who to trust.
I always am nervous about Q&A sections because I think I won't have an answer, but I do have an answer to this one, which is NOFA. NOFA accredits organic landscapers. So we have been for the last 20 years or so teaching a course called, it's an accreditation course in organic land care. And so over the entire nation, actually out of Connecticut, we have trained nationwide organic landscapers that come with an accreditation that is an AOLCP, an accredited organic land care professional. A list of those you can find on organiclandcare.net. The Connecticut NOFA website links to that as well. There is a list, I think we just put up in the last couple of days for AOLCPs in Fairfield County. So you can look to that list and find folks who have been trained. And then many of those guys and those men and women will also offer dual services. So even within that landscaping company, they may say, we maintain lawns conventionally and we maintain lawns organically. So you need to advocate for yourself as well with those landscapers. I'm the organic lawn care person. I only want organic services. And you are really looking for that NOFA logo on the side of their truck or on their website. And if you have a landscaper that you love and you don't want to leave for one of the AOLCPs, suggest that he or she take the NOFA course. Because that may actually be incentive for that person to hear their customers saying, hey, we want organic land care, can you do it? And we've heard of this course. So I think that is probably the easiest way to do it. The organiclandcare.net.
Great.
Look for the list for Fairfield.
We just put that in the chat for everyone.
Thanks.
Our next question is a few questions put together. So first is, what are the do's and don'ts of lawn care? Can we use any crabgrass repressant, any fertilizer, or if we want to let lawn grass grow and become a meadow, what grade should we be planting, and where can we source the best local meadow grass? So it sounds like do's and don'ts, crabgrass, fertilizer, meadow.
So crabgrass is one of those sort of opportunistic species. And I know it can be challenging for folks. I would certainly turn to the AOLCP folks in your community to help with that. Part of what crabgrass does is thrive in specific in a specific fertility pattern. So just like any bug, you've got to beat these plants at their own game. And crabgrass can be a real problem, but I know that at least some of the fescues, if timed right, can begin to outcompete it, essentially. So that's one. Are there repressants? Yes, there are organic herbicides. There's citric acid, there's corn gluten. There are organic pesticides as well that are simply non-synthetic, so they can often be less permanent in the landscape. Saying that, I would make sure you have a professional who is advising you if you really do think you have an imbalance that would require an herbicide or pesticide, particularly around invasive plants. I think as a farmer and someone who has used some of these OMRI listed, OMRI, OMRI listed herbicides and pesticides, I can say they span a wide spectrum of efficacy. I always sort of sympathize with folks walking into a local garden center because someone mentioned earlier the greenwashing of the industrial chemical industry is really hard to navigate. And so that acronym that I just gave you, the OMRI, the Organic Materials Review Institute, OMRI, you're looking for that seal on the back of any product to know that that actually has been vetted as safe and non-persistent in the environment as part of an organic land care program. The number of amendments and fertilizers and pesticides that will say all natural and green and, you know, homeowner safe and pet safe, and none of those things I know how to navigate. So I would look for that OMRI list at your nursery, at your local nursery.
Great.
What was the other one? Sorry, I only got through a couple of those questions.
You did the crabgrass.
Oh, meadow plants, right.
Yeah, meadows.
So there are folks who can advise you. I actually just had a great interaction with a young man, Hayden Stebbins, who is in, I think, New Canaan or maybe Westport, who has an organic meadow installation company and is young, and he works with his dad, and he's incredibly energetic. There are folks like Hayden all over the place popping up, and I've worked with them for years, who can do more intensive meadow installations. Usually a true meadow grass is something that we have to source from further afield right now, because we're not producing them yet in Connecticut. We will be, hopefully, in the next couple of years. And you have to prepare that soil. So there's sort of two schools of thinking about establishing a meadow in your home landscape. One is many of these native, one route to go is that many of these native plants exist because they are simply native, and they exist in our soil to begin with. And so if you simply stop mowing, might be a maize plant sitting there waiting for opportunity to grow once you and there are folks who take that route and simply stop mowing and then give it a year to let the soil rest and see what emerges. The other path is to take a more a quicker and more active role in actually tilling that soil, preparing a bed, smothering the weeds, and seeding in exactly what you want, and even inserting in plugs of specific plants that you want. Usually landscape architects will take that route because they have a color palette or something else they're looking for. But again, it depends really on how much you want to invest in your time and your money into the installation of that meadow.
Sure.
But I certainly know here, I'm a master of neglect on landscapes, and sometimes they really do end up quite beautiful by doing absolutely nothing.
So the next person said, I have a large area of land behind a wetland. It is very overgrown with thorny growth. Do I need to clear it before planting native species?
Very overgrown with thorny growth. That probably means invasive plants have taken over. And I would recommend getting a very good set of gauntlet gloves and getting in there to try to beat those back. I think the invasive plant issue is one that we are all struggling with. It can be overwhelming at points, but taking a good weed wrench this time of year and getting them, particularly right now, because invasive plants green up very early in the season, and therefore they get the advantage on many of our native crops because they catch the light and take off before anything else. It also means they are incredibly vulnerable early on in the season for getting cut back. So barberry, which was one of the real nasties, and in fact is one of the prime host plants for ticks. Barberry is a really good one to go after. It is public enemy #1 right now. So if you can get out the barberry alone, you've managed to reduce the tick load on your property, and you've managed to bring the sunshine in that will allow you to establish some of those other plants. So yeah, I know it's not fun, and I know it can often be pretty overwhelming, but getting those plants out is probably essential to getting new stuff established.
Thanks, and that's a nice segue into the next question. Are any of these native plants more tick resistant?
Tick resistant. We have, in working with the botanists at Highstead, one of the things that they did initially is to choose plants. None of them are going to be tick resistant, but because the ticks aren't living on the, they're just crawling around on the plants looking for a mammal host. But the plants that we are working with now, particularly in that Wilton plant sale, or the ones that we are recommending people start with, are plants that are full sun plants. And we do know that if you are putting plants in full sun, and any garden that is in full sun is less likely to have heavy tick loads. The other thing, another piece of research which I found really compelling, is that many of the wildlife, like I think I heard Mary Ellen LeMay at Aspatech Land Trust talk about this, and looked up the research, that a possum in walking through your yard is essentially a like tick Roomba. It walks around your yard and is a magnet for ticks. And a possum, and then that possum goes home at night, sits in her little burrow and eats, and is incredibly hygienic and eats all of those ticks. A possum can eat something like 80,000 ticks in a year. And so the presence of that possum in your backyard is actually hygienic in terms of, so the more life you have, the more that life starts to balance out. When we have a sprawling area of invasive barberry, it becomes, you lose that diversity, that wonderful principle. You compromise the diversity, and therefore ticks begin to exist in out of whack numbers. And so the more diversity you have, even down to those funny looking possums, the cleaner potentially your backyard is for some of the out of control species like the deer tick.
Got it.
Crazy about possums though.
I would have never guessed they could eat that many. Someone said, I'm planting native plants, but as for the lawn, is clover good for pollinators? And if so, where can one buy clover seed rather than just the grass?
So clover is great. I know John is probably nodding and smiling because clover is a huge forage crop for honeybees, but you will see all of our native bees enjoying the nectar. It is not, but the clover, most of the clover that you buy for your lawn is not a native clover. It's not a native plant, but it is an essential piece of lawn health. And you can buy organic clover seed at Johnny's Seed, at High Mowing. You can buy it at Fedco. I would check with your local nursery supply store. I know there are a lot of folks in Darien and New Canaan. Some of the great nursery providers down there would be able to source it for you if they don't have it. And part of what, you know, I laugh because when I started farming, I used to walk into really high-end restaurants and say, oh, do you carry any food from the Hickories? Trying to encourage them to actually buy local. And I think we can do the same thing as put a little consumer pressure to our local nursery outlets by asking for these products. I'm not just looking for clover, I'm looking for organic clover seed. Can you source that for me?
Right.
And I'm sure they would love, if they don't have it in stock, they can get it for you.
So are there
company? The only caveat I can say to that is because of the current crisis that we are in, many of the seed companies have shut down sales to residential people because they're simply trying to provide seed to farmers who are increasing production pretty dramatically right now. So it may be hard to find seed at Johnny's and High Mowing, some of those things I listed, but I'm sure your nursery provider would have it.
Great. So are there people who go to people's homes to help assess their yards? Because I'm a complete novice.
Yes, those are those organic land care professionals. You can work with, and in the AOLCP category, we have both the installers, the guys who can come and the women who can come and actually plant the plants. But there is also another category of landscape designers who can really start you, you know, soup to nuts with a way of rethinking that entire landscape, down to the water features that the little baby birds need. I mean, it's really extraordinary how thoughtful some of these landscapes can become. Oh, Kayla, is Kayla frozen? Maybe, I don't know. Are you there? Well, I can try my best to move on with more questions. It may be that our time is up. John, are you there? No? All right. Looks like Kayla may have jumped off with the internet. It looks like there are a couple more questions. I'm a complete novice. I got that one. Are there any moves from the town councils to prevent pesticides? Ugh. Yes, there are, and you can look at some of those organic towns on the website nofa.org. Many towns across the state have stopped putting fertilizers and synthetic pesticides on their municipal fields, but there are efforts around. In particular, I turn to some of our AOLCP, some of our organic land care professionals up in Portland who have passed citywide ordinances that are pretty astounding. Yes, you can start to see that happening. And if you go to the organic towns section of our website at NOFA, you can find that. Last, I know we're already over time. Possums sound good. Any advantage to groundhogs? That is a funny question. I have zero love for groundhogs as a farmer, so no would be my short answer, but I'm sure that's not true. All of the creatures are welcome, just not on my farm. Groundhogs is a tough one. Probably they do some good, but I have yet to discover it. And then our last question is what to do about Japanese stiltgrass? Yeah, that made it onto the scene in this last decade or so. There is I'm not sure I can recall it right now, but one of the fellows who teaches that organic land care course, Mike Nadeau, who is sort of in the pantheon of organic land care landscape professionals in Connecticut, he has a protocol for stiltgrass, I know, that works. It is a real nasty, and it is definitely it can turn into a monoculture really quickly. So I don't know that there are a couple out there, and some of it, sometimes, if it does get bad enough, people will just renovate their lawn and try to eliminate it altogether just by tilling it up, again, or smothering it with tarps and cardboard and all of that. So I can certainly recommend you to Mike Nadeau or to the organic land care professional in your neighborhood, because they will have access to that protocol as well.
Maybe just in closing, Dina, I'll mention as someone who has been doing this for many years that this is not an expensive exercise. In fact, you save money because the plants like the environment. They can handle the weather, they can handle the winters, they can handle the drought. They're adapted to it. And unlike exotics that take a lot of tender loving care and water and attention and pruning, natives don't. And, I have wild orchids on my property. I have the only Connecticut native cactus on my property. There is a Connecticut native cactus. I've had it there 20 years and it keeps coming up every year. Trillium, bloodroot, and so forth are wonderful, diverse plants. And once they get going, they love the environment. And so, when having a plant, it's not just what it takes to put it in, but it's the total cost of ownership. And many exotic species take a lot of care in order to thrive. Natives don't. Plus you get the benefit of all the moths and the bees and the hummingbirds too. And it's just, it really makes a wonderful, healthy environment.
Terrific. Thank you. Well, I'm sorry to